Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. I'm here with my co-host, Ann Zeta. We were off for 2 weeks, and classic formation, Fort Worth likes to get crazy when we take a break.
And I had several people approach me upset that we were not available for 2 weeks. I was at a social event on Thursday, I think, and 2 people came up to me and was like, "Where has the pod been? I rely upon you all to give me the information about what I should be interested in Fort Worth."
Yeah, another person who was upset was my wife, because she had to hear it all, and I didn't have a place to actually escape that energy. So she was like, "Please just go record with Ann. Like, stop this with me." But we have a lot to talk about. The reason is December 10th is a historic city council meeting. We'll have an array of topics that all of us care about, from mercy culture and them getting their exploitation center. We're going to have now the city manager has been accelerated with Jay Chapa, which we also have as the big story, because we get the privilege to sit down with Councilman Chris Nettles, who is going to talk about his feelings about the process. And we also have some economic development updates with Bell Helicopter, who has a tax incentive kind of development plan in place in Alliance. We are going to have very strong wins and losses as well. That could have been short stories if we would have been doing this weekly the last 2 weeks. So strap up and get ready for an exciting 817 podcast day.
Yeah, and even when we don't meet every week and talk about these things, we continue to send each other the articles. And so, we sent articles back and forth for 2 weeks that we're not even touching on. So,
yeah.
I don't know. I had opinions about most of them, but we can't make all that up. Somebody suggested that we do a 2-hour pod. That was one of the suggestions of the people that was complaining to me. He was like, "I would listen to you all for 2 hours." And I'm like, I don't think we have 2 hours.
Yeah, we can see what happens here. We have an interview. We have a lot of opinions. I've drank a full cup of coffee. We'll see what happens. But let's go ahead and dive into the first one, which is Mercy Culture updates. And they're at the process now where people will be voting on that position. And clearly there's 2 sides of that position. You have the Mercy Culture side, who wants to get their center up and active. You also have the Oakhurst Neighborhood Association side as well. And so these are things that's been going on. The stressful part about this, it seems relatively quiet, because it also seems like there's some hold by the city's lawyers of what they told the zoning committee about what they do. I also, the state has recommended, the city staff has recommended to approve the center for Mercy Culture.
Yeah, we talked about this on a previous pod because it went before the zoning commission. And the observation that we made was that the zoning commission voted on it, and it was a split vote. But they voted on it without making any comment as to their reasoning for their position. And they voted to deny, even though, as you pointed out, the staff report has a recommendation for approval. It is not a zoning change, though. One of the things that is interesting is that while churches can be in any zoning category and sometimes are rezoned to something called community facilities, in this case, it's a planned development, which is a specific zoning case for a specific spot. So you put a site plan together to lay out on the lot exactly what activities you have where in a PD. And a PD, a planned development, is usually done to accomplish something that cannot be done under straight zoning. And I don't know exactly why that happened for this piece of property. I think it was put in place before it was Mercy Culture Church. It was the previous church and school that was located at this. It was a church school that was located on this property that got that PD zoning. And so the staff, my understanding is the staff determined that it wasn't a zoning change that was necessary. It is just a amendment to the PD site plan to designate this use as being one of the uses that's allowed there. And I think the staff's conclusion is that this is a church-related activity, and therefore it is allowed alongside any other church activities that they deem that they want to do there.
I think this is where there's some communication, and we'll have some links. Is obviously, at least I am team supporting Oakhurst and them wanting to get to protect their neighborhood. So Oakhurst would like to make sure that there's people at the event. At the city council meeting, we will have kind of ways you can take action. They posted some things on their Instagram, but they also gave us a written statement. The written statement says, and let's be clear, before I get to the written statement, I tried several different ways to get people who were talking about mercy culture on the pod, and the amount of fear, and people said, no, I will not, because they're scared of the mercy culture people, is actually like the most surprising part about all this. But I was able to get from the Oakhurst Neighborhood Association, who had a last minute ditch effort, I reached out to because all my leads and people I was trying to get on didn't want to jump on. But they did say, gave us a written testimonial statement, and here's what it says. The Oakhurst neighborhood is calling upon the greater Fort Worth community and its neighbors to stand with Oakhurst in opposition to Site Plan Amendment SP 24013, which would allow for the construction of a 100-plus bed facility intended to house and assist in the recovery and treatment of victims of human trafficking. Oakhurst is not opposed to helping victims of crime, but there is a very real and objective question neighbors are asking. Is this the best location for a facility such as this? Oakhurst believes it is not, and asks City Council to deny SP 2403 for the following objective reasons. Inadequate design, location, and arrangement of parking and traffic flow that will exacerbate existing parking and traffic issues. Increasing crime and other public safety issues, as well as unknown future use of structure should the proposed facility fail, will endanger Oakhurst residents and impact property values. Nuance created through increase in noise and proposed security lighting. Inadequate buffer between the proposed structures and Oakhurst homes. Oakhurst asks other Fort Worth neighbors to write council members and request the same relief to deny SP 24013. That is a statement they wrote specifically to the 817 pod.
The article that came out after the zoning meeting was an opinion piece that was written in the Star-Telegram titled, Church Wants Fort Worth's Okay on Housing for Trafficking Victims, but Will It Serve All? And I thought that there was an interesting perspective provided in this opinion piece because, you know, as you and I have spoken a lot about, sometimes neighborhoods and individuals are opposed to zoning cases. And the typical reasoning is parking and congestion and traffic. And so you can bring those things up to be opposed to a lot of things. And sometimes those things are positive things and things that maybe would be compatible with the neighborhood. And the neighborhood is just saying no in that kind of NIMBY, not in my backyard kind of way. But I think that this opinion piece really lays out some of the reasoning on that isn't not just kind of a NIMBY response. And I think that road that they're talking about that this zoning case is on is a park road. And it also was identified kind of in the park plan as being, you know, kind of a rural, not rural, but like a park road, not a arterial that you might find in an area where you have kind of that heavier traffic of people coming and going. So I think there are land use reasons to consider. And I think that and I'm not sure if this is a decision that was made at the federal level of what is considered a church activity. And so I'm not sure if legal is giving their opinion based on that. And that's the reason why they're saying that they cannot restrict any church activities. Because to your point about what church activities we would be restricting, there's another article that we'll provide in the show notes where Ken Paxton has vowed to shut down a Texas church's homeless ministry in a new lawsuit. So this is another church that's doing some activities that they deem to be church activities that our lieutenant governor our attorney general has decided to try to stop. So, you know, who deems whether a church activity is appropriate or not? And there's been a whole lot of conversation about church activities that, you know, started to kind of get into the politics side of things. And all of these organizations continue to be tax exempt. And so what if they start doing activities that are, you know, commercial activities? do those things continue to be tax exempt? I mean, this just seems like a more complicated question than just a land use question.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge with the Oakhurst positioning is that they're trying to stay objective and play this by the rules that city council will play by and the zoning committee played by. But I'm very disappointed in city staff and Oakhurst's like message in the sense of we have to be able to prepare if they're going to threaten us and say they're going to sue the city. They're going to call Democrats the demon party. Clearly, we don't live in a separation of church and state. This church is political. People go to this church to get endorsements. Nathan Scatzline is a state representative who gets a direct pass to the mayor to talk and advocate for this. And the problem with it. The problem with it is that then the lead pastor, Heather Scott, says, is able to say stuff like, quote, the most successful restoration homes are also run by churches or partnered with churches because everyone knows that there is no curriculum. There is no individual. There is no counselor. There is no human being that is going to heal these girls of the extreme trauma that they've been through. It's going to be Jesus. So the other problem is when you're having an intellectual conversation with someone and then someone says, it's going to be Jesus who makes the decision. I am a bad person if I say that's a ridiculous statement because then that means I am, anti, Christianity or Jesus. But it's just a statement that everyone then can say in Texas, oh, she's so right. Jesus is the answer. And so no one has the courage or it can step up because now you look like an anti-Christian if you say that really doesn't make any sense. And so there's just so much stickiness that Mercy Culture has thrown in, but everyone else is trying to play at the same rules. And this is a common issue with progressives and Democrats or change makers is that we try to play the game on an honest level while they get to just threaten, bully, at their congregation. They have interwoven politics within their churches already. And so, like you said, and on top of it, this law is so vague. What is a church activity? We need to really answer that, regardless is at a state or at federal level. However, we live in a country that probably if it did ever go to the Supreme Court, it wouldn't be in Oakhurst neighborhood's favor or anyone else who clearly knows. And they have quotedly say that this is an exploitation center. People who are in their most vulnerable position, people who've been sex trafficked, who now are going to be preyed upon to believe in Jesus. I just hope these other religious entities in Texas and in America, mosque, other centers across this country to double down on also whatever a church activity is. Because clearly, if Mercy Culture gets away with this, everything else is in play. Everything else is in play. And we should use this if this pass, as a way hey, even other institutions that don't identify with Mercy Culture is going to start doing the same thing. And maybe I'll start going to some congregations and putting in some money just because I want to see other people be able to create their centers because it's a church activity for something else. So yeah, I think this is very disappointing. And unfortunately, there's not a lawyer in play or funding in play, and no billionaire is upset about this in Texas because it doesn't bother us. We only care about the cultural district. But at the end of the day, there's no billionaire able to fund the lawyers to get this to national attention. Moving into the second segment here, we are not aware of the agenda of how this will play at City Council, which one will go first or last. But we're going to go ahead and move into the Bell Helicopter expansion for the manufacturing plant. And there's also another company, I believe it's Ariat is how you say it. And so they're also going to be in this. This is good to know because my loss, I'm going to just say it up here up front now, is Dickey's. The headquarters, Dickey's, is moving to California. I just think that's a loss in the sense of I always believe Dickey's is the truest brand of what it means to be a Fort Worthian, not Stockyards, not Cavender's Boot Store, not the rancher mentality cowboy. I thought the blue collar, proud Dickey's brand was the good, right blend of urban, diverse, blue-collar, proud fabric of Fort Worth mix with Western cowboy culture at the right nuance. So my loss is Dickies, but this is about some positives of economic development in Fort Worth, and I'll get to the Dickey stuff later about in my loss. But this is about Bell Helicopter, which is going to be investing $632 million in a new advanced manufacturing plant in North Fort Worth Alliance Hub. It's going to be up for vote this Tuesday. Sources close to the negotiation says details are still being finalized. If helicopter manufacturer Bell is able to move ahead with the plans, the proposed project is anticipated to result in about $632 million in investment and create 520 full-time jobs by the end of 2039, with the minimum salary of $85,000. In return, the city would agree to abate up to 85% of incremental city property taxes over a 10-year period. The company's new property tax revenue would be reduced by $46.75 million. Bell would also receive a one-time grant of $1 million following initial projects completions and up to 10 annual state tax incentive grants. The Texas Comptroller Office recommended the approval of the company's application for a state economic incentive program in April. If the project moves forward, it will result in $16.3 million in net new property taxes for the city.
Yeah, I think sometimes people don't understand how these economic development agreements work, because they see it as the city giving away tax dollars that they have paid into the system. And that's not really how it works. I mean, as you just read, and it is kind of complicated, this expansion will create new taxes, and the city is just abating some of that. So tax dollars that would not exist if this expansion wasn't happening will still come to the city. They're just not being required to pay the city all of the taxes that they are creating with this expansion. And so every time economic development does an analysis, they provide the city council with a breakdown of the overall gain that the city gets from this in the long run. And it is not taking the hard-earned tax dollars that you pay as an individual citizen in the city of Fort Worth away and giving it to this corporation.
Absolutely. And the council will also consider an economic incentive plan for Ariat International, a footwear, apparel, and accessories brand designed for equestrian sports and other activities. I know equestrian sports is a thing that the mayor is really saying is a part of our economic development, and how Fort Worth is a part of that. So it seems like a great fit. The company is still based in California. They're not moving. They're expanding with additional 250 more jobs and investment of $72.6 million. The project is for an expansion of their existing regional headquarters and create a second distribution center. What I would like to know and get your take on as a former city council member is there ever a point where the leverage is in the city and the company realizes we just need to pay all the taxes and don't get an incentive because we need to be next to Alliance and DFW? It's hard to find another one of those. I think about someone who maybe, if your company is based on the coast and your business is about something about the ocean, and it'd be hard for you to go to San Diego and be like, we need some tax credits or we're moving, because then there's only a limited of options. Can you really move? The cost of moving, the talent pipeline you lose.
I think businesses are constantly balancing and measuring all of those things. Yeah. And they're usually playing cities off of each other. They're usually, I think in this article, it talks about that they're evaluating other locations, and that evaluation includes what abatements those places might be giving. But if Fort Worth has certain specific things, like this Western heritage for Ariat, that is a draw for them, and something that would be in the positive column for them choosing this location, and maybe can be balanced, and we don't have to give as much of an abatement or an incentive, because if we're competing against somebody that doesn't have that. But there are other communities that have that as well. So, I think it's just a nuanced dance that goes on, and whichever one is deemed providing the best options for that company is where they end up going. I think sometimes they threaten to leave when they're just trying to get a better deal. I had a couple of businesses approach me and say, we want to do an expansion here, but unless you do this, that, and the other thing for us, we're going to look at other places. And some of that didn't end up panning out. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, Bell is headquartered in Fort Worth, and it currently employs 4,000 people. In 2022, the Army awarded Bell a massive contract worth millions to build the next generation attack helicopter worth $70 billion over decades. Bell opened its $20 million test lab for the new helicopter in Arlington in March. Something that in a dream world for me is that anytime the government gives companies money, the government would own some type of ownership of the returns and earnings of that company. What's crazy is like
it sounds like Shark Tank.
but why can private investors invest in a company, give you $10 million, and then get distributions? If we're talking about our economy is we can't afford and we're in trillions of dollars of debt, well, we've been giving companies for the existence of our country all these tax breaks and helps with, if you were a car company during the Obama administration, why does the people not own any of these companies if our tax dollars went to fund helping you out build your incentives? It just seems to me, you see it worked for universities because universities now like own a ridiculously amount of Facebook and Apple because all their endowment gets to go play in the venture capital space. Same with churches, the Mormon church. Their investment portfolio includes investing. Why can't the American people's investment portfolio also be able to get distributions when we invest in our companies?
Through the government.
Yeah, through the government.
Individuals.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that.
But you know what it is? It's going to be like, it's not freedom. Now you're a communist. Now you're a government state capitalism, and it's all going to rant off. And that's why it would never work here in America. But hey, you at least heard it from me. Now,
I do like that they say their expansion includes using an existing facility that was previously occupied by something else, because I like it when we adaptively reuse things and don't just, tear them down and throw them in the landfill.
Yeah. And I also love that. I just love all the things that Alliance is doing. And really personally, I would love a full-on field trip and behind the scenes if someone would take me just to see all the masterminds and cool vision for that place, because at least that place has vision.
One of the very first tours I went on after I got elected was Alliance by helicopter.
Oh,
so the
nice.
Alliance folks and Hillwood folks took me on a tour of that North Fort Worth area in a helicopter.
Nice.
I will tell you, I am not a good helicopter passenger.
Yeah, I don't think I would be either.
I got motion sickness. I get motion sickness in a car when I'm a passenger, and that up and down motion added to the side to side motion made it a little challenging. I had to sit there with the air conditioning blowing on my face the whole time. It was kind of a fancy helicopter. It was pretty fun.
Yeah. After Kobe Bryant, I there's no way I'll be in a helicopter. That's just
I know. This is why this flying taxis stuff just makes me think, oh, no, thank you.
Yeah, no. Great. Well, let's go ahead and move into the third story. And the third story is the other thing that's going to be on the city council agenda that was rushed onto the agenda. And that is the decision to make Jay Chapa our first Hispanic city manager in the city of Fort Worth. Jay Chapa is supposed to be hired by Fort Worth's next city manager before leaving his role in 2022. The former deputy city manager worked for the city for 25 years in supervisory and management roles. During his tenure, Chapa overviewed police, economic development, public events, human resources, finance, Visit Fort Worth. And before he was assistant city manager, Chapa was director of housing and economic development. So this is obviously a search happening because David Cook, our longest standing tenured city manager, is retiring February 2025. And so really a lot is here to discuss. I'm going to pass some of the data and some of the information that needs to be shared to Ann just to get some of your takes and just flow of what you see is important to know here.
So as I shared before we started our interview with Councilman Nettles, I have never been a part of a process of hiring a city manager because David Cook was hired before I was on council. His first council meeting and my first council meeting were the same meeting. And this hire was after my term on council, so I was not a part of the process either. The city council is tasked with hiring 4 or 5 positions, and city manager is one of them. We are a city manager form of government. And so the city manager is basically the CEO or the manager of the corporation of that is the city. And I, for one, think that that's a good form of government because I think city managers are people who go to school to learn how to run a city. There are cities that have a strong mayor form of government, which I think things fluctuate a little bit more on a political platform when you have that. And when people are unelected and other people come in, then I think there can be major disruptions within a city when a mayor has kind of that strong mayor focus.
I think some of the important parts there is we had 154 total applicants for this position, which is 3 times the amount as Dallas. But then also there was a closed kind of Fort Worth Council interview for 5 candidates, which we're going to get into conversations with Chris Nettles about. So honestly, I think it could be best to actually allow people to hear Chris Nettles' interview.
Yeah.
And then you and I come back.
I think that's probably a good way to handle it.
Awesome. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to bring in Councilman Chris Nettles, who represents District 8. He's also a pastor. He's also an entrepreneur. And he is also someone who continues to be active on making sure the community is aware of what's going on at the city. So here is Councilman Nettles.
Well, first, thank you for allowing me to come on the podcast this morning. Appreciate it. My Fort Worth story is simple. I was born and raised here on the south side in Morningside. My grandparents still live there. I graduated from North Crowley, who is the only Fort Worth team that's still in the playoffs. Just to have you know, the football team. We beat Allen yesterday, and so we headed to beat Duncanville next week. I will tell you, my children, my family, my church, the daycare I own and operate is in District 8. So I'm heavily invested in the south side, the southeast Fort Worth. And so that's just kind of what my story is. I wanted to be elected to better my community that steered me to be who I am today.
Awesome. Well, I know we have an important city council meeting coming up Tuesday, December 10th. You guys are deciding on voting and hiring Jay Chapa as city manager. I know you announced a letter on your communications to the community about your concerns about the process. Can you just give the listeners more insight about your concerns and just things you would want us to be aware about?
Yeah, I think it's important that we just be completely frank with what transpire with the city manager search. Historically, and former council member can also jump in, but historically, we have hired an outside independent search firm. To even hire such as our director, the parks director, the library director. And so in this complete search, the mayor led the search. And under her leadership, she decided that we didn't necessarily need to hire an outside firm. We could use our HR department. And there was a candidate that was named at the very beginning of the process, who several members wanted to become the next city manager. And I said, this is not a good process from day one. And I also said, if we go down this rabbit hole, I'm going to be very vocal and transparent with the community about what we have done, which was not completely transparent. And so Jay Chapa has been named. There's a couple of things. I think Jay Chapa is qualified. I think that he can come in and run the city on day one. However, the process was not transparent. It was not baked. It was basically handed to him. And I don't think that the 12th largest city should operate as such. And some of the other conflicts of interest, why I believe we should have had an outside independent search firm instead of going through our HR department, which under the leadership of Deanna. Jay Chapa hired Deanna. And so that's also somewhat of a conflict. And so we went into the interview process. We had 5 candidates we interviewed. At least 3 of those, including Jay, was qualified, ready to start. Some had different visions. There was one gentleman that had an MBA. He's currently a city manager today, who will remain nameless, but never had an opportunity to really become the city manager because it was already baked. We went into that meeting with Jay Chapa having 6 votes. We walked out with Jay Chapa having 6 votes. Basically, it was a split council who believed that Jay should be the next city manager. But it's been pushed down our throats, and so I think it's important that the community knows, and if at all possible, we can stop this process and restart. And if we can't restart, give the community an option to have an input. When we hire I'm rattling a little bit, you can ask questions. When we hired the Fort Worth police chief, I believe we had a mix and mingle. We had a community conversation. Leadership came in and met the different candidates to see who they could best work with and gave us feedback before we hired the top police officer in Fort Worth. So why don't we do that for the top CEO of Fort Worth?
Yeah, I've missed the hiring process of a city manager. In the 7 years that I served on council, they hired David Cook. Right before I started, David Cook's very first meeting was my very first meeting. So he started as the new city manager, but I was not a part of the process to hire him. And then it had been, years before that. And then I left, obviously, before this hire happened. But I had spoken to several council members that I have had the opportunity to stay in touch with and ask the same kind of questions that you're asking about an opportunity for people to have input, because I, like you, had seen the opportunity for input, the opportunity to interview a panel of candidates, to learn about candidates and their vision. As someone who is a city planner, I have strong feelings about what our next city manager should be, what their vision is for the city. We've definitely focused on we're growing. And so whatever their vision is very important to me personally, and I think to a lot of residents. And I think we all know that we can reach out to our elected officials and give input, but we talk about wanting to engage with our citizens and get input from our citizens. But if we just leave it to them to reach out without providing a process for them to give that input, I think that that's a missed opportunity. So that was why I was excited for you to come on today. This is not turning into a question, and EJ typically accuses me of just rambling on with my own opinions about these things. But I think that, like you said, I think Jay is a good man. I worked with him when I was on council. I think he's qualified and capable and can do a good job. But I heard in an article, and it's interesting to be on this side of things and not get all of the day-to-day communication that a council member gets, and to read articles after the fact and see that there were 140 something or 50 candidates, 3 times as many as Dallas, and it got narrowed down to 5, and I don't even know what that process looked like.
How did it happen? And you know that normally an outside firm will, if you have 150, they'll get it narrowed down to maybe 20, 25 or whatever, and they'll submit those to council, who is the electing board, and you get to kind of look through those. And we got 3 tiers, and when you are outside and not in, I believe it's more transparent, because you don't know who this person is, who that person is, and you're simply just looking at resumes. And sometimes you go and ask questions, but this process did not allow that. And so I'm like you, who are those other 150 who applied, who had experience? We didn't see those. We saw at least 15.
And I think with there were rumors rumbling around about whether there was a baked-in candidate, as you said. And so my thought would also be who didn't even apply because Correct. They thought that might be the case. But, I think that's always the case. If there's an internal candidate, people sometimes think that could give them a leg up because they know the community. But to the point of knowing the community, I think that's something that Fort Worth has always fallen back on, this idea that whoever comes to work for the city of Fort Worth must be from here and know the community. And I think that often leads to us not exploring other ways of doing things.
Yeah, and so it seems I guess the thing that is concerning for me as more of a newer resident thinks of the modern way Fort Worth is becoming. This shows the legacy style of the Fort Worth way of, oh, we are still operating as a small town who should have a big vision. So I guess was there? It seems like because this doesn't happen a lot, is there a process or expectation of how this works, or is just always since the lifetime of finding a city manager, this has been the approach, and so people are just accepting? I've seen other council members kind of say, "Hey, when you stood up, it's like, hey, this is how it always is." And how often does that get us in the way of trying to create change of people saying this is how it always is when you're trying to show that maybe there's some other ways to do it?
Right, and I totally agree with you. When I got elected in 21, five other council members got elected, and so the council basically just kind of flipped over with new leadership. We walked in our first meeting, and the issue at that time was we was understaffed with fire, and so we walked in. We was like, "Hey, city manager, we need to increase our fire budget and hire new professionals to work with the fire department." No, I already have my budget, and so I looked at staff. I looked at the city attorney. I said, "Well, that's the city's budget, and so if you won't change the budget, how do city council change the budget?" And that kind of turned into where he had to step back and say, "Wait a minute, this is a new council, and the way I used to do things, I can't do those things like that anymore." And so if you see that the council has changed, you must understand that our city is changing. And so if our city is changing, then we cannot continue to do the things that we have done in the past. And basically having a bait candidate, not giving, and you're right, I think people did not apply because there was already a named candidate. I had former council members calling me who I don't talk to every day, was like, "Hey, is this true?" And I was like, "Well, you have people on council that's doing that." And I made myself very aware and clear that I didn't say nothing until the process went through, just to give the process an opportunity. But from day one, I said that we at least should have an outside firm. We don't hire a city manager every day, like we alluded. David was hired when Ann started. That was 10 years ago. And we try to stay with what we have. And so when's the next time we'll have another city manager? As Ann also alluded to, we focus on growth, annexing, bringing jobs and creation, but we didn't really focus on transportation. We didn't focus on infrastructure. We have not focused on our homeless population, our issues. And so we need a new city manager that is not part of the past, and nothing against that, but somebody who has a bold vision to move forward. And we need a city manager who will give the community an opportunity to voice their opinion. If we don't allow the community to have an input of who the next city manager is, will he feel obligated to listen to the community?
What is and it seems like there could be this fear that, is there a fear that kind of the vision of Jay Chapa could be similar to a David Cook model of is there that kind of fear that we're going to get something more of the same, or what do we know based off of, I know it was a closed door interview process, that you think we might get different if it's approved, on Tuesday? What are some things that you can see can be in that vision, possibly based off of the interview that you guys had, I believe, on like December 5th?
It would be it would be more of the same. As he alluded, I know Fort Worth. I've done this, I've done that. I created this, I created that, which was kind of stark to me because I alone cannot do anything. We have to do it as a group, as an effort, as a community. And although this is a city manager ran government of the city of Fort Worth, however, we are duly elected to push our views and our things we want the community to look like in the next phase, such as our budget, such as what we spend money on, such as how we operate as employees. And so I'm really disappointed. And I'll tell you, there's more steps that we're getting ready to do. We are today. We'll hold a press conference, and Councilmember Williams and I will ask for this process to be halted. We will also ask for a full disclosure of any projects that Jay Chapa has participated in as a private consultant. Because when he left City Hall, he turned into a consultant for different projects, such as the Texas A&M, such as Fort Worth Convention Center, such as the stockyards with the garage. And so there could be presumably a conflict of interest, and whether it is or not, the community should know before, council should know. And so if it is a conflict of interest, we should make our decision deciding on that, not just being blindsided and then these beautiful rugs, push it underneath the rug and just cover it up for the next 10 years.
So I think I'd heard that, looking back at process and how we hired, you mentioned other department heads where we've had more opportunity for public input. And I've heard a few people point to the other hires that the council does, and that there haven't been those kind of things for the attorney and for the auditor. And that is the precedent that is being followed in this case. In my opinion, a city manager is a much different animal than a lawyer or an auditor. Those are very specific professional qualifications. And a city manager is as well. But I think that doesn't hold water so much for me as to not follow the same process because we didn't for those other things.
Yeah, and I agree. And I will tell you, I've slept since then. I don't remember each process, but I think one of the processes we did allow for employees' input. So employees had opportunity to meet the two top candidates. And I know we did it for the police monitor when we had two great top candidates. We allowed the staff, the employees, to meet the two candidates and give their feedback of who they like. The other thing to that, and was I did ask for community input, but I also asked for just a second phase of interviews because the other thing is Jay did not do a great interview. And there were others who, just nailed it to the wall. And so I was like, no, he's not a good interviewer, X, Y, Z. I said, okay, that's fair. Bring them back, bring the other two candidates back for a second interview process, and then with a different phase of questioning so that we can have another opportunity. We shouldn't use 1 hour to decide who's the next city manager.
Was there employee input into this hire? Because I know I spoke to the young professionals group, and I suggested to them that they give their feedback, because I know as city staff, when a new city manager comes in and makes a lot of changes and combines departments and renames departments, that can be a very disruptive thing to employees. And so I made it clear to a couple of people that I was in touch with that getting feedback from young professionals that work for the city of Fort Worth right now would be a great way. So I didn't know if they were in the process at all.
No, that we spend one day of getting the candidates. We named a few ones that we wanted to interview. We spent another day interviewing and made a decision. We were actually supposed to have this decision in January. But when my letter came out, it is what it is. The mayor decided to push the vote to this Tuesday on Wednesday and had it added to the agenda on Thursday. And she has some council support. Some of us are going to push back on the process. And, it is what it is. I'm not trying to throw any daggers at anybody, but this is not a strong mayor form of government. And so I have reminded city staff, the manager, attorneys, that they don't just work for one council member or one mayor. They work for the entire council, and not only just the entire council, but the community as a whole. And so we have to be cognizant of that and not just move just because somebody has the gavel in their hand. And so I think you'll start seeing a lot of friction as we move forward in this next year, and if we're reelected in the next 2 years.
Well, we definitely appreciate your time and giving us your insight. Is there any kind of lasting expectations or things that you would like citizens of Fort Worth to be thinking about moving forward?
I'll just say this. Try to stay as engaged as possible as you can. And that's why I bring things to the community. Sign up. This vote is on Tuesday. It's a resolution. You have the right to sign up and say, hey, you like the process, you don't like the process, you want the process to be halted. And even ask the council members to give us, why is it being rushed? Tell us. And so email your council members. Believe it or not, we look at those emails. Even if we get 100 of them in one day, we scan through them. And so reach out to your members of council and encourage them to continue to allow this process, and anything that we do moving forward be a transparent process.
There was 3 times the applications for the Fort Worth city manager position in Dallas. What are you excited about? What does that mean? What do you think this means for the future of our city?
Fort Worth is a great place to live, work, raise a family, and thrive. Fort Worth is a city that has a small town feel, but it is very urban and is growing rapidly. It's the 12th largest city in the United States. It's the fastest growing city. People are moving here leaps and bounds, and so I'm excited about that. I'm excited about new leadership, and so the more people we get to come in Fort Worth can provide value and greater leadership to Fort Worth. So I am excited that people want to be here and want to be a part of. And the candidates that we interview, they came from different places, and hopefully they'll be named soon. I'm trying to do the right thing about it being an executive session, but some things need to be told, that they came from all over and they were intrigued. They were excited to be a part of Fort Worth. And so I tell people, although we might not always like the process, Fort Worth is a great place to live. So let's just keep on plowing forward.
All right. So now that we have heard Chris Nettles' take, and he shared a lot of insight, I think he shared a lot of, I love authenticity more than anything. People who are willing to get to the ledge and talk honestly. What were some things that registered to you, and what would you like to kind of, with the articles that we've read from the news, but now actually have a councilman who sat with us, what are some things that stuck to you?
So I think what was interesting to me, and because I have been through some of the hiring processes for some of the other department heads and assistant department heads, and, ahead of the police department and the police oversight commission. And in those processes, there was input from the public and opportunities for some direct input from the public. And in this process, as you stated, and as was stated in the interview, we had our in-house HR do the search and it was a nationwide search. And like you said, there was 140 or 150 applicants, which is huge. And it's interesting that our neighbors to the east were having a similar search and did not get as many applicants. That may have something to do with kind of the turmoil that went on with the previous city manager and the current mayor of the city of Dallas, that people maybe didn't want to step into that hornet's nest. And so I think that process, I know that I can reach out to the people that are elected, and I can reach out to the people that represent us and share with them my opinions about things. And I have the ability to do that because I have their email addresses in my phone, which many people can do that. You can go to the city's website and find that, but not everyone pays as much of attention and avails themselves of those things when it is not provided to them in a format of come to this meet and greet, come to this panel discussion of these potential candidates and give us your input. And I didn't see that process happening. And it's a little bit interesting to be on this side of things now. When you are in the council seats, you are presented with kind of the breakdown of how HR went about evaluating the 150 candidates and taking it down to the 5 that they ended up interviewing. As the public, and this is interesting because I used to kind of text you about some of your hot takes that were based on articles and things that you read in the paper, when I had that insight as an elected official to say, oh, that's not the whole story, or you don't know everything. And now I'm in that position of not knowing the whole story and not knowing everything. And so I think that to the councilman's point of making the process as transparent as possible and sharing with the public how these decisions were made, because it was interesting to me. He mentioned that they are going from making this decision in January to making it in December. I'd have to go back and reread those articles to see that. I know that they wanted to have some overlap with the current the current city manager and the incoming city manager to make sure that that seamless transition occurred. But if it was a rushed process to be done in December rather than January, and I do think that there should have been, from my perspective, a very clear laid out way for folks to give their input as to what they want to see in their next city manager.
Yeah, and I think, when you're talking about a city with $2.6 billion and 8,100 employees, that is a city. It should operate like a public company at the same caliber size who is bringing in their CEO.
And speaking of those employees, I would have liked to have been assured that there was some kind of very robust process by which the employees could give input as to what they would like to see in a city manager. Because I have seen a brand new city manager start at the city of Fort Worth and make some changes and, rename some departments and move people around. And I have seen kind of the concerns that can bring to folks who are in a role and in a position, and to have those things change. And I think those people that have boots on the ground doing that daily work have knowledge about how those departments work together and how they don't work together, and how things can be siloed, and those silos can cause things to not happen in the best way possible. And so I think that those employees could bring a great deal of insight to anyone considering this role, and could help, and also just to hear the vision of the various candidates of what they would like to see Fort Worth be.
Yep.
I'm
especially with all the stuff we're doing with the comprehensive plan in the 2050. Like, it would have just been great to infuse them in that mix, because you're asking what's important to us as community members. What is their vision? Why couldn't we double click on some of the, kind of going back to Shark Tank? Like, why can't these city managers sit on Shark Tank and we all get the live broadcast, watch them give us their 7-minute vision for the future of Fort Worth, and then allowing us to have a voice about that.
I totally remember when we hired the new fire chief, that my concern, because there were fire chiefs across the country who were not in favor of traffic calming measures and infrastructure on streets that save pedestrians' lives and make streets safer for pedestrians, roundabouts being one of them. And so that was one of my questions for Chief Davis when he came in. Are you a fire chief that thinks that the roads need to be wide and clear so that your big apparatus can travel through the city at a high rate of speed to get to these emergencies that happen? And he was like, I understand that complete streets and traffic calming will actually result in less calls for service for the fire department. And so I believe in those things. And that was something that was important to me to ask. And, I was in the council member seat at that time, so I had the great opportunity to do that. But those roles, I think, also did have, the opportunity for citizens to meet several potential candidates before a decision was finally made.
Yeah. And again, just the size of Fort Worth, the size of Fort Worth budget, the size of Fort Worth City. Our city's budget is the size of eBay, the size of Palantir, the size of Etsy. It is a big company, a big brand. And so we need to have a big, bold vision. And unfortunately, I agree with Chris Nettles on the process. It's that as a new Fort Worthian and an outsider Fort Worthian who's not a part of the establishment, this is the old school way of still acting like a small town. And if anything, this December 10th city council agenda is going to play out like this, most likely. Hopefully maybe Nettles and Jared Williams' press conference that he mentioned that's going to happen. Maybe there will be some minds being shifted. Maybe there's enough people talking at City Hall to change people's minds and see we need to have a more transparent, authentic way of doing this. But if it happens, you're talking about a Mercy Culture getting their exploitation center. You're talking about Bell Helicopter getting their tax cuts. And you're talking about a guy who gets the job without who people were already saying had the job before we went through the process. That is the Fort Worth way through and through. It is acting like a small town. It is nepotism. It is all those things. It's the same way. And I always... Anytime, the only time I'm not a fan of really Mayor Parker's leadership is when someone challenges her, because then she gets real. She just gets real. I feel like bullyish. Oh no, he's the best. Now she's gonna accelerate it. Because she is the establishment. She got to where she is by the same way Jay Chapa is getting to where he is. The same way Craig Goldman gets to where he is. This is the process of the Fort Worth way. And if you don't say Jay Chapa is not a part of that, I mean, when you look at the projects that he was included on and his involvement, the Crescent Fort Worth, nothing in the cultural district, Dickey's Arena, the A&M project downtown. I'm waiting for you telling me when this is not a Fort Worth way project. So, and I'm tired of driving by these beautiful places and then having to drive down Lancaster all the way to my house and truly feel like the two separations of Fort Worth. And Nettles represents that other side of Fort Worth that constantly doesn't get a voice, that constantly has no idea that this is even happening. And it gets rushed, a holiday. There's already a lot on the agenda. And this has nothing to do with if Jay Chapa isn't the right person. It is the process of this is what Fort Worth does. And it's this, and it's just stressful because I think the way the federal world worked out for administrations who won that, it's showing that that's okay. And that this is how you can run countries and cities. And so we're going to have to live with those kind of outcomes. And I'm just thankful that there is at least some council people trying to challenge and stand up. So, yeah.
I mean, you know me, I'm always the one that's like, I would rather not have this be adversarial and a battle and that we have to rile people up in order to get them to be engaged, to come and fight something. I would just like people, and this might be naive on my part, to pay attention, understand the impact that local government has on them, and participate. Find an area in this whole arena that is important to you, that you derive pleasure out of supporting and making better, and plug in and do that thing. This past week, Arts Fort Worth had some gatherings at the Community Arts Center because they are about to no longer be in that space going forward. And, I am optimistic about the future of the arts, and I am optimistic about the future of Fort Worth. And I think we really are kind of on this precipice of being more of and more inclusive and having kind of those better way of doing things and not just falling back to the way that we've done things in the past. It takes a lot more work. It takes a lot more compromise and listening and willingness to work with folks that maybe don't think that the thing that you think is the number one important thing is that thing. But it is the right thing to do. And that is some of the projects that Jay has been involved in recently are some of those things, with his involvement with what's going on in Northside and the historic Northside community. So I don't think that just because someone has that historical history with the city, that makes them, like you said, I mean, everybody has said that we're not saying that he is the wrong candidate. It's just we don't know
anything about
who
him.
didn't apply for the job because they thought that this was going to be an internal hire and that wasn't going to happen. I mean, 150 people did apply, so clearly some people thought that this was an open enough process in order for them to consider being considered for the role.
And you heard Nettles, he said other people knocked it out of the park. But this is always the classic privileged class gets to operate and be an 8 out of a 10 on an interview. And even when you're an exceptional marginalized person, it doesn't go to you. At the end of the day, this is a lot of how, and again, I am not saying that this isn't, like, I think also what I hate about this situation is people say Jay Chapa's the best person for the situation. There's no such thing as best with 154 people. It's preferred choice of what you think is best. There is probably ways in other people where that would be great in other ways. So it's like this idea that there's only one right way, there's only one answer to this city manager is one, I think, like,
yeah, that's not accurate.
Yeah. So it's like he is the best choice. No, he's the best choice for the people who currently want to operate Fort Worth in the way that Fort Worth thinks it's the best.
I mean, I remember going to multiple National League of Cities conferences across this country. And after a year of kind of just having my head down and focused on Fort Worth and hearing about what we were doing in Fort Worth and working on the things that we were doing here locally, thinking we're doing pretty well. This is great stuff we're doing here. And then I would go to Pittsburgh and Baltimore and other places where we had National League of City conferences. And I would hear from all these other people doing either similar things or way bigger things. And I would just be like, we need to be willing to pick our heads up and look around and see what is happening in other places and not just continue to always do things in the way that we've done them in the past.
And you don't even have to go to Baltimore. Like, you could just go to the new DFP, Dallas Frisco Plano, the Dallas Business Journal. Boomtown becomes big city. Economic evolution of Frisco reflected in the next wave of big developments. Frisco isn't playing to be a suburb. Frisco is playing to be a big city. Understand the Toyota Center that holds FC Dallas in Frisco has over 20,000 seats. You know how many Dickies Arena has? 14,000. So you know how many startups they're investing in? I don't think we're holding on to that Techstars program. There is so much things that are happening just on the other side and going north that shows that we are not dominant just in our area. And so it's just like the protectiveness and the lack of ability to inspire and have imagination, to create, to be more inclusive, to not be afraid of people who don't think and look like you or talk or walk like you or don't earn their stripes because they walked in your shoes. We're always going to continue to be locked in. And I just think that's, Fort Worth is currently the only things that get built, those things that billionaires think is nice for their projects. It's not things that I believe is thinking of the size of Fort Worth. And, but I think Fort Worth is a good representation of America and possibly where America is going to as well. So it's all good. I am aware that this is how we live, but I think if there's anything we can be honest with, it's just like, it should have been more transparent. All right, so we're going to move into wins and losses. We like to end on wins, and so we're going to give our losses first. So my loss, like I said earlier, is Dickies Arena is moving to California. Like I said, I think it's a loss because I think Dickies, a company that's been here for over 100 years, is the true embodiment and vision and brand theme that I think is best for Fort Worth rather than the stockyards and cowboy hats and cowboy boots. I think they represent the true blue-collar prideness of Fort Worth, but bring it and make it more inclusive. So just from a messaging and an energy base, I think that's very sad and disappointing. But also, I think that's the loss as well is, and maybe this is a win for me. It's just like, you hear the politicians like, well, just remember, 250 companies have left California and half of those have came to Texas. And it's just like, this idea that California is bad is so false. Like that like we tell a bunch of Fort Worthian people this propaganda because they never go to California. But like I was in California 2 weeks ago, and I'm talking to a kid who goes to USC, and he's like, "Oh yeah, every kid in California gets food stamps and gets $300 grocery bills to like wow, that is nice." I'm hanging out with people who are from New York who, are blue collar, average salary people who's like, "Oh, it's actually more affordable to live in New York City." You know why? Because to take care of my kid is $87 a week. So it's just like these ideas that like we're this like affordable place to live and everyone is missing out. No, like I actually think this is like a part of the issues that Fort Worth is getting sold because, oh, we have no income tax, all that stuff. The state of Texas does that. But these places are good for other people to live. And just by saying that, oh, we're more affordable for the CEO. Oh, we can bring CEOs to Texas, but doesn't mean we are the best for the people who end up working here. And I think Dickies, who also, this was more of they're owned by people who also own vans and other companies, and they're based in California. But I think that I don't like that Texas constantly pushes that we're the best for business, because I think what they mean, they're best for business owners, but not necessarily best for people who work in these spaces.
I don't know. I the hubbub that flared up when that came out about the whole moving to California thing just drives me insane. And that thing that you said about, everybody demonizing and saying California is this terrible place. Obviously, I'm from there originally. I have family that are all still there. My children have gone there, and they were Texans and they moved there. So I think that part of it is nonsense. I think it's sad that we didn't know this was being considered and that they made this decision. And there wasn't any ability, and I don't know this all for sure, but it seemed like electeds and other folks were caught by surprise that this announcement was made and they didn't know it was happening. They moved downtown and rehabbed a building in downtown, $4 million worth of, improvements to that building, and then made this decision. Combining with another company they own, that is probably part of what makes sense to them. They do have that skate apparel part of it, and we have a skate park that's branded with their name, and we have Dickies Arena that's branded with their name, and so there was a lot of discussion about what's going to happen with all of that. But that's all contractual, and so the skate park will continue to have Dickies branding on it, and from what I've seen, Dickies Arena will as well. I don't know what the timeline is for that. But yeah, I just start concentrating on what you can do to make your community better and stop trying to compare it to other places and demonize other places.
Yeah, I hang out with a lot. I travel a lot for work. You travel a lot. We're from other places. And I'm looking at the bills to live in Texas, and it's not. When you start adding up, okay, our mortgage payment is less than all these places. Cool. But then you add the property tax. Then you add just our lack of real strong healthcare system. Then you add in, if you have kids, then you add the time on the road to get the jobs, the gas. I dropped someone off at the airport, and I was in a rental car. Sorry, Ann. I was in a rental car because I had a lot of people who needed a big van to take everyone and luggage them around. But I was dropping them off at the airport, and I was there for 5 minutes, and I had to pay $2 to go in and out. And the person was like, "You have to pay to drop us off?" We spend so much money on little things. Ubers in Texas are way more expensive than Ubers in other places. The list can keep going. It's actually not that cheap to live in Texas. But we need to start having an honest conversation, because if I can go any further on that, the Dallas Business Journal just came out with what it takes to be in the top 1% in Texas, in Dallas Fort Worth. It is $650,000 to be in the top 1%. It has jumped 24% since 2022, and so it's it is getting more expensive, and richer people are coming here to show up. But the dive of what that's making hard is that conversation there. But then what happens is, clearly people who are feeling inflation in Texas. The cost of Texas is voting in Donald Trump because they felt better in 2018 than they did in 2022. But then at the same time, we had a 10% increase on Black Friday spending, and we had a historical day where everyone's going to get on a plane, and we couldn't get all these cars into the airport. So it's just like, it's all hoopla on this idea that the federal government in California and New York and our taxes are making it more expensive. No, it's richer are getting richer in Texas, and Texas is good for owners, but not for people. But we need some type of
But continue to look at all these social
it's
issues
worry
over
about
here and don't pay
trans
any
rights
attention
and
to
abortion,
that
which are
financial stuff.
important, but these are marginalized conversations. But don't talk about that. Me and my wife at 35 are spending $1,000 a month on health care because you had to get our new health care renewed for the year, and it's just $1,000 coming out of one of our salaries to pay for health care. And regardless if I break my leg, it's still $18,500 before it actually matters. They don't want us to talk about that. They don't want us to talk about the real issues, and they want to sidetrack us about the things that, yes, they matter, but they aren't the priority things they want to talk about. And I think those are the reasons why more people are aware of mercy culture at this next city council agenda than who's going to be the CEO of Fort Worth. What is your loss?
Per my usual thing of not liking to just have losses sit there and stay losses and complain about stuff, my loss is going to be a little bit of a hope on the horizon loss. Fort Worth ISD has an oversight committee, and they are calling for more involvement in the $1.2 billion bond. And I think that there's just been a lot of stories in the news about Fort Worth ISD, and a lot of it has been negative, and it has all been focused on them not having high literacy and just a lot of negativity. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to make the meeting that the Fort Worth Report had recently, a community conversation about the future of Fort Worth ISD. But I heard very positive things about that meeting from folks that did attend. And I think that there is going to be some tough conversations going forward about how these bond dollars are spent and changes to where that money is going to go based on some tough conversations about what schools remain open, what schools get combined. And so I think that it is going to be emotional and hard, and people, even in the very brief redistricting that occurred while I was on council, which, council is separate from the school board, and so those decisions are made separately, but neighborhoods are represented by school board representatives and city council representatives. So there, is some crossover. But people are going to have to be willing to make some decisions and support some plans going forward that are for the greater good and not necessarily for the individual good of, your individual family. And I don't know how that's going to fly, because people buy homes based on attendance zones for schools. And I think there's going to just have to be some hard conversations. And this article that the Fort Worth Report wrote about the changes to what the committee is calling for basically says we've kicked this can down the road too long, and now it's time for these hard decisions to be made. It's challenging for school board representatives because they are completely volunteer, unpaid elected positions, where a lot of times they have to sit there and listen to people spout nonsense and yell at them. So I don't even know if this is really a loss. I think it's a gain that we're talking about it. But the fact that we've kicked this can down the road so long and not made these hard decisions previously, and we went through having a superintendent that, came in after that bond was voted on, and I'm not sure what happened in the 2 years that she was here, but it seemed like a lot of changes were made that have had negative impacts on how schools are run and operated. And I just look at all of this from the perspective of the teachers that I know and what their opinion of how things could be done differently.
I think it's crazy that you can vote on a bond the size of $1.2 billion and then not use the money for what we were voting it on once it's over and change your mindset.
I think that it is. I don't think that can I'm not sure if that can happen at the city level. So I'm not as familiar with that. It says in the article that can happen. So much has changed in the time frame, but we probably should have anticipated that those changes were in play when the bond happened, because it doesn't make sense to renovate schools that are no longer going to stay open. So if the bond was to renovate a school that then experts determine that is not the best way to educate children, then I can see why there should be some ability to change that. Now, should the process be truly transparent and open so that the folks who voted to have it spent a certain way can see the thought process from the policymakers that are making a change in where those dollars go? Absolutely. Should there be a public process by which people can come and say yay or nay? Absolutely. But to my point about being willing to look at something that will be for the greater good versus my individual desire for my kid to continue to go to a school that is no longer viable, that's an emotional thing. Like, I want my kid to go to the school that their older sibling went to, and
Yeah,
things
and something I just think is there's a lot of lack of vision here, because, like you said, the bond happened at a certain time. Then you had a new superintendent, but then you also had these pandemic dollars that flooded school districts like Fort Worth ISD. And so they had to down prioritize spending that money, which had a timeline. So it makes sense how a lot of this bond is still not used, because just all this cash that came in. But then I guess what just really sounds confusing after reading this is like all the firing we did because we said we didn't have money. And like there's $800 million sitting here. So it's just like, it just looks really bad. I'm obviously a fan of the current interim superintendent. I've always said on the pod, we need someone who's been in Fort Worth ISD, who has come up through the mud, who is here. And I think Molinar has been great. But something I'm going to put this in the show notes is I always bring up Substack, and I pay money to bloggers that I like to read their stuff. And one of the articles that was written is 5 myths about America. And it was talking about how the myth was that America has a bad education system. And so what he did is he looked at the PISA results, which basically are the Program for International Student Assessment. It is an international study that compares the performance of 15-year-old students in reading, mathematics, science, and literacy. Who created it? It was created by the OECD in 1997. And what he showed here is that, when you look at America as a whole, we're like ranked on the PISA performance. When you look past like the first and second generation immigrants, what you see is that the United States, on average, we're like number 15 on here. Like Netherlands, New Zealand is better than us. United Kingdom is better than us. Germany is better than us. Hong Kong is better than us. We're better than Poland, Australia, France, Norway. But when you take it out and you put it by race, U.S. Asians are the most intellectual 15-year-olds in the world, and it's not even close. Now then it goes Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, U.S. whites. So when you take out and you look at ethnic groups in U.S., Asian kids and white kids are crushing in the American education system they get. Then when you go all the way down, the next under, now it just starts falling, U.S. Hispanics, they get scores close to Vietnam and Israel. Like that's where, Hungary, Lithuania. So like kind of these mid-tier economies. But then when you look at U.S. blacks, it is like Uruguay, Romania, Kazakhstan. They're getting the educational levels of the kids from those areas. And so really, to me, it's this the real thing that we have failed when it comes to the education system is black and brown kids. But a lot of that's the societal setup of how we fund schools, how we love classism in America, how we think sending our kids to a bunch of schools where kids make the same amount of money as us and looks like us, rather than putting our kids in schools where you get to actually hang out with real humans who live in America. We think that's better to do that than to do this. And so those are just things like we are doing well, but it's just not, we're not doing well for everyone. Yeah. And so now let's go ahead and move into wins. And my win, I'll go ahead and do my win because my win is more of like, I think people who listen to the pod would be like, that's not a win, EJ. But it's to me a win because I think it makes sense. So my win is that I appreciate that Elon Musk is challenging Fort Worth-based Lockheed Martin on their F-35 jets. Musk has talked about how we are still building man-made fighter jets, but clearly wars are now won by, drones. And how he basically, I talked about this before on the pod too, is how much money goes to these historic legacy kind of military based companies and how much we are paying for things. And so like a lot of times people say America's the best because we spend more on military than all the next 9 countries combined. But that doesn't mean we're just spending a lot more for the same things that they get for a lot less. And it's a lot because we're getting, Lockheed Martin is making old things. They're behind on F-35s. We see what happens with Boeing airplanes. A level of nepotism and legacy orgs with no real competition and then regulatory stuff that makes it hard for you to compete. This is one thing I can support Elon's little Doge thing, doing. So I think they should get on their toes and we should figure out how to be more nimble and build 21st century military-based companies that, might need to protect humans in, the future.
I would like to protect humans. I don't really like war. So that is a challenge. And then the idea of drones, I think it's the same thing. It falls into that category of autonomous things. How do you make those?
It can be human in a
but it's
building.
Like,
yeah.
I don't know. All of that is.
You're not killing lives because it's not, no one's inside of it.
But you're shooting at.
Oh, well, no, you're shooting regardless. I'm not saying that's the good part. You're shooting regardless. But what I appreciate about this is that as much as I'm disappointed in the way this is attacking schools, I am a pro of this attacking the military industrial complex of America. And so what I guess the win is for me is that I don't think Elon Musk is a Republican. He's just picked himself on a winner that he can influence stuff, which I'm not saying is good. But this thing, I can say, yes, we need a double click, and all of you military big companies should be afraid that, hey, you're the one who voted for this guy, not I. So now his, government efficiency czar is about to show up to your block and say, all of y'all are fraud and we're behind when it comes to developing
in a different
new
way.
Machines of war, which I'm not pro-war.
Yeah, war is not good for human or any living things, children and any living things. That's a little sticker I have at home. So my win is that it's a transportation win. Shocking, I know. I don't think you would have expected that at all. And it's 2 things that Trinity Metro is got going on right now. The first is that there was an article in the Fort Worth Report saying that Trinity Metro is shutting down the Fort Worth bike sharing with plans for a new program in 2025. So the headline a little bit negative, but be happy to hear that this new bike sharing program that is going to be starting up in the new year is going to have new bikes, new stations, 90% electric bikes, and that this is just going to be a huge improvement. Bike Share started as a nonprofit. It is now part of the Transit Authority, And therefore, it is part of the multimodal transit system that we are building and improving in the city of Fort Worth. And so I think that this is an absolute win. There's going to be some different pop-up opportunities to see the new bikes and to learn about the new system throughout the city. I attended one at Dryce Lobby Bar the other day where they were spinning vinyl and had a bike there for people to see. I did not ride it because it was wet and slippery and I didn't want to fall over. So anyway, that's a win. And then also Trinity Metro is building on their TexRail success with a Stadler fleet expansion. So they're going to be adding more trains to the Trinity Metro route between downtown Fort Worth and the airport, which is important because, as you mentioned earlier, what happened on the Sunday after Thanksgiving when literally all the roads around the airport came to a crunchy standstill. I saw video of people getting out of cars and walking on the roads with their suitcases to get to the terminals. And the airport put out
And you know how crazy how far the terminal is once you just get through the toll? Like,
it's far.
Like, I was like, there's no way you're getting there on time.
No. And then the statement that the airport made was, well, we tell people to get here earlier at busy times, and we tell people to make reservations for parking, and we tell people to do this and do that. Not one mention of the fact that 2 trains service the airport straight into Terminal A for DART, Terminal B for TexRail, and Trinity Metro.
And it costs as much as me dropping someone off. $2.50.
It costs $2 now. They've lowered it to $2.
You could get $2 drop off, or you spend $2 to drop someone off and come out, and you had to drive,
and
you had
sit
to do
in
all
that crazy traffic.
Yeah,
and there were crashes and all kinds of things. The train is so much better. So
all this rain this weekend. I had to go to Dallas. I was like,
I had to go to Dallas too, and I was going to Dallas for a meeting on transportation. So I looked to see if I could take the TRE, and I could have, and it was actually time-wise, it was pretty comparable. Like driving was about an hour, just under an hour, and taking the train was like an hour 15. But to come back, I couldn't get back for my 2:00 meeting because the time I would have had to leave my meeting early to catch the train to get back to my 2:00 meeting, and I couldn't do that.
Yeah, I was trying to.
But I carpooled. I carpooled in an electric car.
Come on now. I was trying to convince my wife for us to not have health insurance, and what we would do this year is just take no highways for now on for the year because
that's the only place you're going to have
we're gonna
health
get
issues.
dangerous.
Is what you're saying.
It's on the highway, and so I was like, okay, I got to go to Dallas. Let's see what this looks like. No highway. It was like an hour 10, but it was like, okay, what is this like with
your brain?
Tolls, and it was like 35. I was like, ooh, 35 minutes. So I took the toll, but I'm paid like $6 to get to freaking Dallas on a road, and then on the way back, the toll road was someone crashing the toll road, driving too fast in the rain. You got nowhere to go, and so they made all of us get off of the toll, and I'm just like, oh, this is so insane. Yeah.
I put in my app is set to avoid highways, so I always look at the difference between, and if it's less than 10 minutes, I definitely. Yesterday I went to a meeting over in your neck of the woods actually, and it was a meeting about the transit. I should have sent you the thing because you should have been there. A transit hub in Stop 6, and I took the back way the whole time.
Oh yeah, that is doable, but it's like to get to Dallas, to get to north, like if you're trying to get to Irving or even the airport, I mean, obviously take the train, but like just other things like you're trying to get to, it's not as easy. I think in Fort Worth, and maybe if you're going anywhere east, like off of 30, you can stay on. It's easy to avoid the highway, but it's when you're trying to go to like up. Yeah,
north
more,
south. There's
less.
Hard. There's less alternatives to the highway, which you hear complaints about that from folks that have to be up there, and when 35 shuts down, they don't have a lot of choices.
Well, I think this has been an amazing podcast. Shout out to Councilman Chris Nettles for coming on here so last minute and but making it happen. I think he did a great job, and we'll see how everything else goes. We won't have an episode the following Sunday because I will be in Philadelphia for family. But we'll be coming back for the 817 Gather, which is December 22nd. If you want to attend the 817 Gather, we will record a pod for that weekend. then I think we have the weekend of the New Year's. We will be gone, and then we'll come back in 2025 running.
Maybe do some predictions about
Yeah,
what
yeah.
we think we're going to see
Yeah.
in 2025.
Yeah, we could do a prediction.
Or what you all should be focused on.
Oh yeah, I like that. Focus and priorities for 2025. Maybe little predictions. See what we can work up. But thank you guys for being listeners and just committed to the pod. I'm really excited for another in-person 817 gather. So if you can make that, if you're home for the holidays, if you're hanging out, it's going to be on Sunday. So would love to see you there. But thank you.